Amen. It is so wonderful to sing with all of you again, and it is so nice to hear Christmas music, so thank you so much to everyone who has made this happen. It's just good to be together during this Christmas season, as Tammy and Thomas shared a little bit earlier. If this is your first time here, welcome. We are glad that you are here. Something that's a little bit different about Paradox is that we are near the end of an 8-year sermon series. We are starting part 62 out of 66 as we go through every book of the Bible. And today we are in the book of Malachi. And what's different about Paradox is that here at Paradox, sermons start discussions, they don't end them. So this is not an authoritative end-all, be-all decision on what this book means. We hope that this inspires you to read the book of Malachi for yourself and engage the discussion as we talk about how Malachi influences the way that we live today. Now, we want to do that very tangibly in January. We are going to have discussion groups. If you've signed up and you haven't heard from us, don't worry. We're just seeing who's interested so we can start formulating a plan. We're going to start these in mid-January. It will go with the book of Luke, and we'd love for all of you to participate. There will be groups that meet once a month, once every other week, and also groups that meet once a week. So we'd love to accommodate your schedule and have the whole community participate in these discussion groups. Also, just want to say thank you to everyone who makes Paradox possible by donating at paradoxgiving.com. You have continually blown this community away with your generosity, and we cannot thank you enough for that. Which brings us to the book of Malachi. Now, to talk about Malachi, there are 3 things I want us to pay attention to. The first thing is the misrepresentation of Malachi. The second is the theology of Malachi, and the third is the beauty of Malachi. This is how the sermon will go. If you're type A personality and wondering what the structure is, you're welcome. Here it is. So let's begin with the misrepresentation of Malachi, which involves a story of me being in high school. And yes, I brought pictures. You're welcome, world. Yeah, I made it here. Can you believe it? Now, when I was in high school, I drove a Dodge Neon SRT, and it had racing stripes down the middle, and I loved that car. But I would listen to the radio a lot in that car because iPods were not invented yet. And so we would listen to the radio. I would listen to the radio myself, and my favorite station, without a doubt, was Air One. All the Christian hits you could possibly imagine, right? And I would know all the songs that Christian radio would play. I would know all the words that Christian radios would play. And in between these Christian songs, they didn't have advertisements. They had these evangelistic minutes that basically told people who listened to Christian radio why it was awesome to be a Christian. And during one of these evangelistic minutes, they were pre-recorded, so I heard them frequently, and I could memorize them and share them with others as to why it was good to be Christian. Now, there was one evangelist who talked about how miraculous the life of Jesus Christ was. And this evangelist talked about how there are all these prophecies in the Old Testament, and the odds, the mathematical odds of what it would be that Jesus Christ would fulfill all those prophecies that were made centuries and even millenniums before Jesus existed would come into being in the way that Jesus was and fulfill all those prophecies. I remember this very clearly. The evangelist would say, mathematicians have determined that the chances of Jesus fulfilling all the prophecies in the Old Testament in the way that he did were 1 in 10 to the 57th power. Can I get a hallelujah? Now, I don't know if you've seen a 1 with 57 zeros behind it, but now you have, because that's what it looks like. And if there are any people who love the names of numbers, does anyone know what you call a 1 with 57 zeros behind it? An octodecillion. So they're saying that Jesus is a 1 in an octodecillion chance of coming into fruition and fulfilling all those prophecies from the Old Testament. And as a junior in high school, I would hear this, and I would give myself a high five in the car, and I would say, I love being right. I love it. It's the best thing ever. And the whole idea behind this is that there are 66 books of the Bible. 16 of them are major and minor prophets. If you want to know the difference between a major and a minor prophet, it's basically just how long they wrote for. The longer books are major prophets, the shorter books are minor prophets. There are 16 of them, and Christians will tell you that these 16 books all predicted very accurately and very precisely the life of Christ. And so these exist so that way when 17-year-old Craig drives around in his Dodge Neon, he can high-five himself and say, I love being right, God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. Well, guess what? Things have changed since I was 17. And now I'm 38. Yes, I'm 38. And I hear someone say these things, and my response now is not, I love being right. My response when someone says that Jesus fulfilled all the prophecies is, what exactly did the prophets predict? To which 17-year-old Craig would say, they predicted Jesus, older Craig, come on. And when you look closely at what these prophecies actually predicted, you realize that that claim of 1 in an octodecillion is rather flimsy. Now, I have heard that Malachi is the last book of the Hebrew Bible because it's the one that points the most toward Jesus Christ. And when I say the Hebrew Bible, I mean the Old Testament because they said, oh, Malachi is the one that's the most obvious, that Jesus is the fulfillment of these prophecies. But when you look through all of Malachi, you realize that only 3 verses have a prophecy in them. And the first verse is in chapter 3, verse 1, when we read, see, this is God speaking. I am sending my messenger to prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. Now that picks up in the last 2 verses of the book of Malachi when God says, lo, I will send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of parents to their children and the hearts of children to their parents so that I will not come and strike the land with a curse. So God says, I'm going to send Elijah to prepare the way of the Lord. And if you know your Bible, you know the story of Elijah can be found in 2 Kings chapter 2. And Elijah is training his protege, a man named Elisha. And when Elijah has given him all the knowledge about what it means to be a prophet, God says, you're done here. God sent a chariot of fire from heaven to pick up Elijah. Elijah got on the chariot of fire and then descended into heaven. And Elisha just looked around saying, I guess that's it then. I guess this is my job now. Now, the prophecy contained in Malachi says Elijah will come back. And if you're thinking to yourself, wow, I don't remember the story of Elijah returning to earth in a fiery chariot, I'm sure I would remember that. I don't remember that in the Gospels anywhere. You would be correct. Elijah does not come back. However, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all say that exactly what Malachi predicted about a messenger coming happened before Jesus showed up. And they would point at this guy and say, see, it's the fulfillment of the prophecy. Here's Elijah. And you would look at it and you'd say, that's not Elijah. That's John the Baptist. Malachi promised us Elijah on a fiery chariot, and you gave us this guy? And the reinterpretation from the Gospels is, oh, no. God would send us a new Elijah, not the old one, which is a bit of a letdown. And when you look at all of these prophecies and what they mean, there's this idea that they all exist to predict a Messiah. Not one of these books' central thesis or main purpose for writing is to tell us about a Messiah. Instead, these 16 prophets all wrote about politics. Wow, isn't that fun? Now, when somebody says, I don't like it when sermons get political, I say, fine, just don't ever listen to a sermon from the prophets. Because all of these are political conversation, navigations, and arguments. And every now and then they make a small prophecy, like in Malachi, which is just 3 verses out of the entire book. And that is not so much the central idea as it is an aside. When Christians tell others that Malachi predicted the life of Jesus, we misrepresent the book of Malachi. We have to stop doing this because this is biblical illiteracy. There are just 3 verses that make a prediction, and I would argue that prediction has not yet come true. We have not seen Elijah come back because Elijah is different than John the Baptist. Which brings us to the theology of Malachi. Now, a few things you need to know about Malachi. It was written sometime after 515 BCE, probably within 100 years after 515 BCE. And the format of it, the literary format, is it is a 6-point disputation. It is an argument that takes place between God and the people. And there are 6 different points to this argument, and this will give you a real good feel of the book of Malachi. Now, I'm going to be paraphrasing in order to help clarify what this book is saying. So the quotes you see up here are paraphrases and not direct quotes. I would encourage you to read this book for yourself when you have time. So the first point of 6 of this 6-point disputation starts with God saying to the people, I have loved you. The people are immediately skeptical and they say, how exactly have you loved us? And God responds by saying, look at Edom, your neighboring country to the east. Their lives suck. You have it better than Edom. To prove that I love you, I'm going to make Edom's life even worse so you can say, wow, God loves us. At least we're not Edom. We all know this, we are very familiar with this because we know the 5 love languages, right? The 5 love languages include quality time, physical touch, acts of service, gifts, and treating Brenda terribly and then saying to your wife, at least I treat you better than Brenda. That's how God says, I want you to know I love you. And when you look at this, you realize this is how the book starts? Because this is a little bit disturbing. The idea that God will allow others to suffer to say, oh, at least it's not that bad. Which brings us to point 2 of 6 in Malachi. God says, you do not respect me. The people say, how exactly have we not respected you? And God says, you lay polluted offerings on my altar. The people then ask, like, what's a polluted offering? And they go on to say, when you bring a blind lamb, God says, a sick bird or an old bull for a sacrifice, I know what you are doing. Do you think I'm stupid? You are gaming the system. You need to bring me your best. You will be cursed if you keep bringing your sick and weak animals and giving them to me as an offering. So God, in a very weird, strange way, encourages ableism by looking at those who are disabled animals and saying, this is lesser than. You need to bring the healthiest because the healthiest are the best. And it is a disturbing picture of God. Which brings us to point number 3 of this 6-point argument. We read from the people to start this one. They say, we have not held up our end of the promises we have made to you, God. We have married people outside of our own tribe, and these marriages cover God's altar in tears. We must stop tolerating marriages from our own people to foreigners. Now, God responds with a rather strange comment. He says, I hate divorce, and stop being faithless to me. Now, this might be the most progressive idea in all of Malachi because it might be a condemnation of what was going on at the time. Specifically, the book of Ezra contains a massive statewide divorce led by the religious institution that told people they needed to divorce their foreign wives to show that they were devoted to God. And when we say divorce, what happened is these women and children of mixed marriages were sent out into the wilderness to die to prove their devotion to God. It's a tragic story. It's in the book of Ezra. And there are some scholars who believe that this is a condemnation of what Ezra did. However, God also says, stop being faithless to me, which in this context says, don't divorce your wives. Instead, just stop marrying or doing these interracial marriages, these mixed marriages, because it's a problem. And so it's both like a little bit good and mostly bad. Which brings us to point number 4 of this 6-point argument. God says, you have wearied me. And the people say, how have we wearied you? And God says, by telling others that I love people who do evil. God goes on to say, by lamenting against me and asking, where is God? I am sending a messenger to reform this whole religious institution. This messenger will get all of you back on the right track, and then I will enjoy your offerings again. And once I can enjoy your offerings again, then I will bring about my justice. That's when I will take care of the widows, the orphans, and the immigrants. Now, this is a stunning revelation from God because God, who we proclaim to be a God of justice, says, hey, I don't like it when you complain against me. I don't like it when you tell other people that I love evil. So there are some people suffering, namely widows, orphans, immigrants. I'm going to withhold justice until you stop complaining about them. So I could fix it, but I'm going to use them as a bargaining chip to get what I want. And so the disturbing picture of God continues to grow all the way into point number 5 of 6, where God says, I do not change, I do not perish, but ever since the days of your ancestors, you have turned away from me. Return to me. And the people respond to God by saying, how shall we return to you? And God says, bring me a generous amount of tithes and offerings. This is why you are cursed. Once you give me more money, God says, then you will see me throw open the windows of heaven and the blessings of heavens will roll down from heaven. Once the money rolls in, then I will call off the locust that is destroying your crops and you will witness an era of unprecedented prosperity. So there's a drought and God says, once you give more money, I will call off the drought. Imagine here in California, when we're lacking snow in the mountains currently, I stood up here in front of all of you and said, you want more snow? Give more money to Paradox. You would all run out of here saying, like, last time I go to this church. And yet, that's a very biblical idea of who God is according to religious leaders. Which brings us to point number 6 of 6. God says, "You have spoken harsh words against me." And the people say, "What did we say?" God says, "You said that following me is an exercise in vanity. You question whether or not you should obey my laws." Now, the people think about this point from God and they say, "You're right. We have done that. Here's what we're going to do for a solution. God, here's a list of good people who will obey your laws, and here's a list of bad people who won't." Now, how do you think God responds to people judging themselves and figuring out who's good and who's bad? God loves it in this story. God says, "Excellent. Thank you for this list. The good shall be blessed, and the bad shall be cursed. All of you will see a massive difference between those who serve me and those who don't. Soon you will see the bad be devoured with fire, while the good will be jumping around like happy baby cows." And from there, we get to the thesis after all 6 points of this disagreement, where God says the thesis statement of Malachi, "Remember the law of my servant Moses, to whom at Horeb I gave rules and regulations for all Israel to obey." We then get those 2 verses that talk about Elijah, and the book of Malachi comes to a close. Now, the best way I could sum this book up happened at sermon study group this week, which is with the group that I meet to discuss these sermons to gain a perspective that is greater than my own. Olivia, who's on the sermon study group, said this in response to Malachi: "The voice of God in Malachi does not sound like the voice of God that I know." How much better can you get in response to Malachi than what Olivia said? Now, if 17-year-old Craig heard Olivia say this, he would drive his Dodge Neon SRT up and say, wait. That's strange, because the voice of God in Malachi sounds exactly like the voice of God that I know. This sounds exactly who I perceive God to be. Very regimented, very strict, very much there are good and there are bad people. And here, 21 years later, 38-year-old Craig would hear 17-year-old Craig say this. He'd drive up in his Honda Odyssey and say, "Oh, Craig, younger Craig, let me tell you a few things." And as I look back at this person who really believes in the God that Malachi portrays, I have one of 2 choices really to respond to this person. I can resent this person and hate this person, or I can understand that where this person is coming from and ultimately grow towards something greater. Because if I look back at myself at 17 and I hate him, then the chances are I will hate everyone who reminds me of him. When I see somebody else saying the same thing, I'll be like, "Don't those people need to grow up?" When I see somebody else saying something similar to what I believed in my story and I dismiss them, there is this push to eliminate what came before. And it's important for me to recognize that if I hate myself and where I came from, I will probably hate everyone who reminds me of that person. Now, conversely, if I look back and I can learn to love this person, yes, 17-year-old Craig with all of his insecurities, all of his faults, all of his weaknesses, if I can learn to love this person in my story, then maybe I can learn to love the people who remind me of him. This is an important spiritual concept that I think is the gateway to spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity both transcends and includes the beliefs and stories of our past. We both transcend it, we grow beyond it, and at the same time, we recognize how that story, how that belief shaped who we are today, and we value that in our own journey as well as where people are in their journey as well. And while it may not make much sense, and we read the book of Malachi and we say, wow, God hates disabled lambs, what's going on? Why is God so angry at Edom? This seems like a dangerous and frightening God. That theology doesn't play so well at Paradox. However, if you've ever been to an AA meeting, there is a much more strict understanding of who God is and what God asks us to be, because there is a crisis that is happening. And the theology of Malachi actually matches an AA meeting much better than the theology of Paradox. And if you go through and you lead the 12 steps in a 12-step program, you realize that it's much more in line with how Malachi perceived God to be rather than what it is that we perceive God to be. And there are people who have transcended past that theology after AA meetings have helped them, but there is still like this warm fondness of what came before. And when you look at all of these stories and what these stories mean and how you look at Malachi and how it influences different people, there is an opportunity with it being in the Bible to learn how to transcend and include it in our own spirituality. Spiritual maturity asks us to transcend and include Malachi. Because if we can include the book of Malachi in our religious story, then we can become more loving people wherever they are on their respective journeys. Which brings us from the theology of Malachi to the beauty of Malachi. Now, the beauty of Malachi can be found when you look closely at the thesis statement. The thesis statement is, remember the law of my servant Moses, to whom at Horeb I gave rules and regulations for all of Israel to obey. The book of Malachi can basically be summed up this way. Humans must obey all of the religious rules, and if human beings obey, then they will be rewarded. If humans disobey, they will be punished. Now, does this remind you of another theology that is prevalent right now? If you don't see it, let's go back to that list that the people say, hey, God, we know what you're trying to do. We've created a list of who's good and who's bad to help save you some time. And God responds, great. Does this list remind you of anybody else? Well, what if we change the words good and bad to naughty and nice? Now, does this remind you of somebody else? Santa Claus, right? And the whole idea behind what's going on in the book of Malachi is there's this idea, if you do what's good, you'll be rewarded, and if you do what's bad, well, you don't have any toys under your tree, right? My friends, this is a different story than the story of Jesus Christ. And I have some good news for you. Jesus is much better than Santa Claus. Not just like a little, like massively different, massively better, and massively more inspiring than anything Santa Claus could possibly provide us. And during this Christmas season, when we're talking about the book of Malachi, Malachi dares us to ask the question, how is my understanding of Jesus Christ different than my understanding of Santa Claus? I think every Christian needs to ask this because I've talked to many Christians who believe in a very similar God to who Santa Claus is. And if this is the idea here, then we have missed the point. But how is it that Jesus and this manger with a baby in it is ultimately different than the idea if you're nice, you get toys, and if you're naughty, you don't? For me, the biggest difference between Jesus Christ and Santa Claus can be summed up in one word: grace. Grace. And when we look at the story of Malachi during the Advent Christmas season, we realize that what this story is getting at is that if you are good, according to Malachi, you will be rewarded. Well, that's not how Jesus Christ worked. Jesus came to this earth and met us in the very brokenness of our humanity and declared that imperfection to be good. Declared that God can be found when things are inconvenient. Declared that those who were sinners, according to the religious institution, actually understood God the best. This is grace, my friends. And when we talk about what Christmas should be in 2021, I think that all of us as Christians should be people who live grace-filled lives. There are two questions I want all of us to ask ourselves during this Christmas season. The first is, how have I received grace in 2021? And the second is, how have I given grace away in 2021? Because when we talk about being grace-filled people, we should be able to look back at this year and answer these questions. Now, you may be looking at this saying to yourself, I've gone through everything. I can't find anything in 2021 where I can really say I received grace. I have some good news for you. There's still 4 weeks left. There's still time to turn this around. How have I given grace away? There's still 4 weeks for you to do something that is extraordinarily generous and grace-filled because we are people of grace. And when we can talk about this with ourselves, with our loved ones, with others, about how we receive grace and how we give grace away, at that moment we are testifying to what it means to be a grace-centered person. There is so much grace that is happening around all of us. Some years it is harder to find than others, but my friends, the Christmas message that has rang true for over 2,000 years is that grace is the way this God works. May we give grace away generously. May we receive grace humbly. And may we see and embrace the grace of Jesus Christ in all that we experience. Amen.